Well, hello and welcome to Metaworld News for the week ending April the 30th of the year 2017. The last news bulletin of this particular month. And next week, hopefully, spring will be here. But that's another story. Um, mixed news this week. This program, of course, brings you news from the metaverse, which is our word for the world of immersive collaborative spaces online. We have, of course, got the hypergrid and OpenSim. We also have high fidelity. We've got sine wave space. We've even got the good old Second Life and Talk VR and all sorts of other things. So if we got anything important happening on those platforms, we're going to bring it to you. And you can also follow me on twitter.com/malburns. That's MALBURNS, all one word. And you'll also find links about VR technology and things there too. Only the pertinent things I add. I do not post reviews of the 20 different headsets that seem to arrive every day. It's basically patterns of what's happening in the world of VR, and especially as it relates to our social worlds, of course. Anyway, to get to the stream, I'm going to be reading out the highlights basically from that stream. That's the way we do the news around here. And starting 6 days ago, which would have been last Monday, I guess, a post from uploadvr.com. Uploadvr is all one word. .com, and it's a post from Research VR. They there is a group called Research VR who do occasional podcasts, and this week they put up their 41st podcast, and it's about understanding an autistic child through virtual reality. This it continues a thread of people finding various things to do for social good or medical reasons or otherwise using VR, independent of what headset or what platform you use. And many of these use cases, of course, are just as good if you're using a flat screen. Well, maybe not quite as good, but you get the idea. Also at uploadvr.com, same day, an article saying why VR needs serialized content right now. And again, this is an opinion piece of sorts, but it bears on something we talk about quite a lot, which is it's okay having the technology, but where's the content? And also, it may not be just a matter of content, but it may be appropriate content. I'm not talking about appropriate for particular audiences. I mean appropriate for the medium. Because a 360 video panorama is not exactly state-of-the-art VR. You've had that in Java for a long while, come to think of it. Anyway, both of those links at uploadvr.com. A post from Engadget. Engadget. It's ENGADGET. About something called Quill, which is a bit like Google's Tilt Brush, which is a painting application you actually use in 3D space. It's, in other words, it's not an authoring to make 3D. It's something you go into 3D and use to make further things, art mostly. A Moment in Time, inverted commas, that's the title of a piece that shows the charming potential of art in VR. And you can read all about that and find out more about it at Engadget. Virtualrealitytimes.com, this is all one word, virtualrealitytimes.com. Nanites and nanotechnology for use in virtual reality and haptics. Now, this is the serious stuff, basically. A founding of two companies who designed to interface human brains directly with computers using nanotechnology. The stage has been set for the next stage of evolution, blah, blah, blah. And you can, you may think that's a bit too far in the future, but it's actually here today and very close indeed. How affordable it is and how much people will take it up is another matter. But they look at the ways you can actually could in the future maybe interact with VR just by thinking things or using advanced haptics to interface with the world. Right. During last week, better hit the button here before you start getting the echo coming through. Virtuality Los Angeles event happened, and they've been producing a whole load of clips on YouTube. The day one keynote was by somebody called John Riccitiello, or no, Riccitiello. Go figure. Sorry, John, I'm just going to call you John. He's the CEO of Unity. Yeah, exactly. He's the CEO of Unity, and that was his day one keynote, and I thought that was worth a tweet. So you can find a link to that on my feed, or just look up VRLA on YouTube. More about YouTube if I remember when we get to the Social Worlds news. Right, moving along. VoicesOfVR.com, another regular podcast. It comes out almost daily. And I select the pertinent ones these days to tweet, so to speak. And number 529 featured various VR storytelling highlights from the Tribeca Film Festival. The Tribeca Film Festival actually featured over 30 different VR experiences within their storyscapes and immersive virtual arcade. And they're looking at all the interesting, possibly yet to be decided pioneering stuff coming out of there. It's actually a film festival, but like a lot of the smaller film festivals, they're really embracing VR, and they tend to have slightly more sensibility about what VR offers than the Hollywood film festivals, who seem still to be on a hiding to, well, not nowhere, but they really can't figure out what the content's really going to be. Also, uploadvr.com again. Vision VR AR Summit keynote speakers have been announced and events have been highlighted. And without actually opening it, I can't actually remember where this summit is happening, but it's called Vision VR AR, and you can find more about it on my feed. And talking of Tilt Brush, which we mentioned briefly in relation to another thing earlier, the Tilt Brush is Google's VR app where you can put your helmet on and go into virtuality, and you can actually paint in 3D. So, you know, you make a paint stroke in the sky and it becomes a wobbly 3D thing, but you can also sculpt, as it were, with it. So you could sculpt, you know, like a statue or something using Tilt Brush, and you use your input devices, you know, to operate in the 3D space. Pretty much a thing for helmets and advanced controllers at the moment, but very popular. And this week, according to uploadvr.com, Tilt Brush have actually now launched their own social platform and professional features. So they're clearly grabbing a lot of artists working in this space, actually working in 3D rather than creating 3D, if that makes sense, and forming a social network for them as part of the Tilt Brush package. So there you go. A new exhibit at the Smithsonian in America puts you inside the astronaut's helmet. This is a report from VRScout.com. And basically, it's an in situ sort of VR installation at the Smithsonian that puts you on the a 4-person ride called VR Transporter. And as they say, it puts you inside the astronaut's helmet. I imagine there's a lot of space fans out there who, if they're near the Smithsonian, will probably like that one. Right, startup. Let's doctors practice surgery with medical VR. This is a slightly more offbeat site. It's called PSFK, PSFK.com. And talking about virtuality training could change the way medical professionals are taught. And this comes, this is largely about a London, over here based a company called Fundamental VR. And their target demographic is surgeons. So public news, but not a public facility, so to speak. VoicesVR.com again. Let's see, yesterday they had number 530. Upload LA opening represents a focus shift from VR tech to VR content. jolly good news too. Apparently, there was more focus at the Upload LA, the little event, which is not a huge event anyway, but the podcast catches up with the co-founders, Taylor Freeman and Will Mason, and basically talk about a sort of shift from everybody's obsession with the technology to actually thinking about some content for it. Jolly good thing, I say. I love this one. I do like my art and I love my surrealists. So this one is from a site called perceptivetravel.com. It's all one word, PerceptiveTravel, as Perceptive Travel. Stepping inside a surreal world at the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg. Yay. Well, I don't know that I'm going to St. Petersburg, but I do love Salvador Dali. And there are some still shots on this, which are interesting because the still shots do actually have a very 3D feel to them. It's like looking at an online image of the Salvador Dali painting, but it somehow feels a bit more 3D, even as a still picture. So yes, I would love to just have a wander around all that fantastic surreal scenery that Salvador Dali used to paint. But I don't think I'm going to go to St. Petersburg to do it. If you're in St. Petersburg, or maybe it'll go online as well. Right. Still yesterday, uploadvr.com, an article, How Virtual Reality Can Be Used to Fight Racism and Prejudice in Society. Again, looking at the serious uses of basically what is immersion. If you can immerse people in circumstances that they don't normally encounter sufficiently using VR type technologies to convince them that they're there, then maybe they will perceive, shall we say, the other side of the story, or develop more empathy with people and places that they would not normally immerse themselves in, or probably avoid at all costs in some cases. Okay, so that's the main news, as it were, when it comes to the strict VR news headlines, as I finally changed the screen behind us. Yeah. Let's move on to Social Worlds news. Now, I'm going to. We also have another Twitter stream, I should say, for this program. It's just twitter.com/Metaworld News. And we now have the section I call Social Worlds News before we move on to the Hypergrid proper. Now, most of the stuff on that feed is actually to do with, I'm just flipping back through it. There's not a huge amount there. Is to do with the Hyperverse or the Hypergrid. So this is the bit where I ad lib. Also, if you're a fan of YouTube, it's well worth following High Fidelity YouTube channel. In the space of this week, there have been 3 kind of televised events from High Fidelity, superbly filmed. I gather they're being filmed by somebody called Alan in High Fidelity, whether he's one of their associates or actually works for them, I'm not sure. I watched the first one about this time last week, which was High Fidelity's first talent contest. And I'm dubious about the talent. It brings back the visions of Second Life, but I certainly can't fault the filming or the spectacles. People could get on stage and they could physically juggle balls. And they were operating this with headsets and tactile interfaces. Somebody else came on. It was just a stand-up comedian. There were 2 musicians. And they very much reflected the sort of troubadour-style musicians that we get here in Open Sim and Second Life, for example. But the avatar qualities were wonderful, and the filming quality was wonderful. And the first one, the talent contest, it was actually compared by Dresden Dupre, who actually looked identical to his Second Life avatar. He'd obviously imported the whole trademark, I guess. And I actually went into High Fidelity afterwards to say hello to Drax and Philip Rosedale. and had a little chat with them, which was very interesting. But I discovered to my horror that I couldn't see anything properly because since I was last really nosing around there in high fidelity, the specs, as it were, for hardware have gone up. And most of the people there were working in headsets because they like to be, they're fanboys kind of thing. But in fact, what is a considerably good enough graphics card for OpenSim and space and video editing and everything else that I have on this machine just ain't up to high fidelity. I was looking at it not only looked like 4-bit color, but it was very psychedelic in its choice of color too. Wow. And it wasn't good because what is I would hate to think that high fidelity is moving too much to the headset crowd. When future platforms, you've got to think of where they can be available on mobile. You've got to think of them whether they can still work and are adequate on a 2D screen. And sure, not everybody's going to buy a headset and buy a new computer with the equipment to go with the headset. But I would hate to think that, somebody's going to have to buy a whole new piece of kit to even get into a 2D screen version of high fidelity. Yeah, you could argue Philips' previous venture, a decade ago with Second Life, was a bit similar at the time. It was ahead of its time, and it was only over a few years after it launched that people began to have the graphics capability to really use it. And that capability now seems quite antique almost, So maybe they're just banking on the future being mega powerful in terms of CPUs and GPUs. But and it wouldn't, I have to admit, this wouldn't stop me going in there and appearing on the show or actually going in there and having a chat. It's just that the visual immersion really isn't there unless you've got a bang smack state-of-the-art graphics card. So a little bit of editorial comment there. Now that also 3 other shows have been on their channel during the week. Sort of virtual world chat shows and things. And I just have to say, as on production values, the quality of the filming and the broadcast and everything is astonishing. They've got lower third graphics, actual proper graphic overlays and title bars, and the whole thing is looking good. I don't know whether they've coded the broadcast interface into the environment or whether they've just got somebody operating some super slick software. The content is whatever an early beta virtual world is going to be honest. But nevertheless, the production standards are great. And I suddenly thought, if people actually see these videos, rather like what we do with Metaworld Broadcasting, if 1 in 10 people are intrigued enough to go and download the client, doing the video first is almost a good way of showing people what the world is like, especially since many people won't be able to see it properly if they go in. As yet. Anyway, moving on. The other another social world comes from a company called Sine Wave. It's called Space. We've mentioned it before, but I thought I'd just bring you up to date on the news here. We are actually building a studio in there, in fact, because it certainly looks like a lot of educators are going to be moving in there. And if we want to do interviews for Crosswells and things, it'd be nice to have a non-open sim studio on the, with lots of wonderful lighting and mesh. But, it's an outpost at the moment. I managed to get a lovely mesh city for talking on and a wall behind it. I'm working on it. You can get in there at the moment. Anybody on the Creators Group can check out both Metaworld and MeWorld. MeWorld was a misspelling, but fortunately it means I've now got 2 locations in there. So that is actually looking very good. And I've also there have also been largely tutorial filming going on from Sine Wave, and equally the video broadcasts from there. Well, they're not broadcasts; they're actual films, and then sent up to YouTube. Are looking quite good too. So possibly worth looking out for Sine Wave. or space on YouTube too. I forget which it is. Or it might be sine wave space for all I know. That's what Google's for. Try all three. Right. Anyway, quite good stuff, and certainly a thing we are extending into. It also plays, one of the real beauties of it, quite frankly, is that I'm able to load my region in space onto my iPad. Because as well as a downloadable app, for the desktop, obviously Chrome or Safari on the iPad supports it. There are a few glitches with moving around, but it uses WebGL and stuff like that, and it looks a dream. In fact, in some ways, the iPad version looks better than the desktop version. So one can embed this world on a web page using the embed code, which basically is a WebGL HTML5 thing, and also we could equally embed it on the screen behind me. So I could turn my chair around and interview somebody live on this screen who's actually over in another studio in space. So we might be able to do a lot of interconnectivity, bitty, stuffy stuff here. So really, that's a little personal update really there for the Social Worlds news, because from the last week, lots of events in high fidelity, especially broadcast live, so at least you can watch them if you can't get there. And sine wave you can get to very easily, whether you use the web portal or whether you download the desktop software client. And I am told that there will be an iPad. The iPad experience will be converted into an app within the next couple of months at least. So be fully functional as an app as opposed to a web page. Right. Okay. There are plenty of other social worlds around, but I don't have any active news from them for this week. So I'm going to click to our next slide, which is hypergrid news. The hypergrid, for those of you who don't know, is a network that connects the simulators of a whole load of different virtual world platforms together. The only bottom line, so to speak, is that all these grids have been developed using a version of something called Open Simulator. There is the core Open Simulator code. There are various versions of it. There are things like Ariba Sim, which are actually departed from the core code, but can still connect to the hypergrid. And there are also other derived things, which are very like OpenSim, like Halcyon, which InWorlds is a grid that uses Halcyon, and the American military Moses grid uses Halcyon. And the IMA people who we've talked about recently in the past, the Infinite Metaverse Project, Alliance, sorry. I went to our I don't know, what am I? I'm on the something guiding committee or something, where we went to a meeting about a week ago, and that was on the Halcyon encoded grid. So I couldn't have a grid in, I had to make a new avatar, but entry and movement and everything else was supremely fast and slick, so that was good. Tangential to the hypergrid there. Also, Metaworld Broadcasting here, which is based on the Great Canadian Grid, which in turn is on the hypergrid, or at least most of its regions are. There are a few that aren't anymore. We're actually doing a bit of remodeling here. I'm pleased to say that James here, by the way, who's welcome back to James on our cameras this week, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Glad to be back.
Yeah, and James is also involved a little bit with our future plans for downstairs here, as I say it. We're actually knocking back on some of the landscape regions, and I'm going to be using Federu's Outworlds offline build to make vast regions on my own computer where I can fiddle to my heart's content without them being seen by the public and thus embarrassing me. So all the embarrassing landscape areas that have got all sorts of strange shaped things lying around on them are actually being given up. So we'll be, instead of 16 regions, we'll be down to probably about 8. but or 6 or something. I haven't done the calculations yet, but all is changing as we put studios elsewhere too. Right, okay, so as I said, we have Metaworld News' Twitter feed. Globits. Globits is a virtual world currency company. On In World Review, we spoke to Christopher Galosi a couple of times. Basically, they're enabling cash outs and they're raising the sale limits. Basically, it means that if you choose to use the currency to sell things in world, you'll be able to cash out a lot easier, and you'll also be able to deal with larger amounts. And basically, grids. This is a post, by the way, at hypergridbusiness.com from David Karuki in Maria's absence. Grids are improving integration. The Mobius grid has enabled Globits grid-wide, and it comes with all their rental regions. And here, for example, on the Great Canadian Grid, when you buy a region here, you can choose whether it is Globits or whether it is the local Podex currency. You can't, unfortunately, have a region that accepts both currencies because they have two different back-end systems. But basically, you can choose one or the other. Podex, of course, allows you to connect to PayPal, and it also potentially offers a way of keeping a wallet that you can use on multiple grids. Podex, although it is a common OpenSIM currency on the hypergrid, tends to have a separate wallet for every grid. So, for example, if I've got 1,000 Podex credits, or whatever they're called, Maples, in my account here in Canada, and I go over to, say, DigiWorlds, which is also uses Podex, I can't use my Podex credits from here on DigiWorlds. I would actually have to go to the Podex site, cash them in, or convert them to another grid. Think of Globits as being a bit like a way of carrying traveler's checks around with you across the hypergrid. Obviously, there are sites like marketplaces that are online, like Kitelease, where you can go and buy something direct through PayPal or whatever, and you can have it delivered to a grid of your choice, and it may be exportable and movable when you get it. But that is the marketplace's business, whereas Globits now offers this as an in-world kind of wallet facility, so that it's always to hand in your avatar's pocket or on your avatar's HUD or wherever you care to keep your money in virtual worlds. Right, that was an interesting comment, wasn't it? Right, okay, 6 days ago, Haven, this is a grid called Haven, has rebranded, and they're actually now known as Avi Unite. The grid was called Haven Your World, and it's now going to be called Avi Unite, and it is introducing new social features, a free land offer, guided market deliveries, like I just mentioned, and hypergrid connectivity. If you want to know more about this, it's another post from David over at Hypergrid Business, and he can enlighten you a little bit more. Most of these, interestingly, are from Hypergrid Business here. A one-off post from Maria, she's resurfaced for this one. OpenSIM everything, right? That is the expression, OpenSIM everything, is now the fastest growing community as far as the hybrid is concerned. This is a Google Plus community. And there are plenty of OpenSIM Google Plus groups. OpenSIM Virtual was previously the biggest. I mean, Canada Grid's got one. Almost every grid's got one. I've got one from Metaworld. Lots of groups there. But apparently the one Google Plus community that is now the biggest of all of them is called OpenSIM Everything. And it's biggest single gainer of the OpenSIM specific communities we follow, says Maria. And as you might expect with Maria, she then fills up the whole page with elaborate statistics. So go check out Hypergrid Business if you want more of that. Now, we're probably on the late side here, but David Karuki at hypergridbusiness.com did promote this 4 days ago. The GCG, the Great Canadian Grid, where in fact we're broadcasting from, is hosting an annual art fest this weekend. And I was getting plenty of messages about it yesterday. And technically it is on today. It's actually organized by somebody called Ray Noob. N-O-O-B, the surname. I think everybody knows what that symbolizes.
It's funny.
I suspect he's not much of a noob anymore if he's organizing an event, but there you go. And it is, of course, open to the hypergrid. So you'll find out if you get to greatcanadiangrid.ca:8002. You want to look for RR, that's the letter R twice, space estates. You can obviously type the address in by an extra colon, RR Estates as well. There's also, there's a Beltane Masquerade Ball, but that was actually that part of it was only yesterday. If you've got time and get this news bulletin in time, interesting event for arts event here on the Canadian Grid. Right. Tomorrow's Infinite Metaverse Alliance. Oh, never mind. That was actually, I think this is permanent. There is a Q&A session being run weekly by the Infinite Metaverse Alliance, and this was a notice for Friday, but I think this applies to future weeks too. They've actually they've moved the session from their own OpenSim grid to IMA Outpost Gamma, which is on Bill Blight's OpenSim Life grid. Okay, so the all you need, the landmark in your map is grid.opensim.life:8002, and the region is called IMA space Outpost space Gamma. And I think they are now meeting there every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. And for those of you who don't know the IMA, they are Infinite Metaverse Alliance is meant to be a kind of coordinating body to try and further, the metaverse in, practical, but also in the discussion, abstract ways. It's merged with, I think of Melville's new media arts projects there, and there are an interesting number of people increasingly associated with it. I mean, you've got overall metaverse people like Will Burns with the future schematics, down to individual grid people and stuff like that, and hopefully they're going to make progress with various things. They also are running their own installations, and they have both OpenSim Vanilla, I think they call it, which is the OpenSim most people use. They have an instance of Halcyon, which Moses and principally InWorlds use. They have an instance of Ariba Sim from Freaky Tech. And if you actually want to build or upload an AOR file or something like that, you can actually use their grid services to test it using all these different engines. So, for example, you've done a wonderful build offline, for example, and you haven't decided whether it's going to work best on Halcyon without the hypergrid, or on Ariba with the hypergrid, or on OpenSim regular. You can actually deploy it with them, and they'll do all the testing for you to see what the best results are. So well worth watching some of the stuff they've got planned. And finally, yes, I think it's finally Film Noir. This is the only hypergrid post that doesn't go back to hypergrid business. This is Thursday Ember's weekly blob. I'm really on the ball today, aren't I?
It's the internet.
Yeah, I know. It's these interwebby things that tripping me up. Anyway, there's a picture of me on this one. Gosh golly. Right. basically, the Hypergrid Safari that happens every Wednesday at noon. They meet on the Hypergrid Safari region on FrancoGrid. This week, went to 2 locations. The first location was actually Avacon, where Marcus Llewellyn, who you'll know from a couple of weeks ago on this show, where he stood in, it gave a sort of pep talk about broadcasting and stuff like that. It has since appeared on YouTube, although for a machinima that's about broadcasting, I think it must have been Joyce Betancourt who filled it, not Marcus himself. Mm-hmm. It's not very good. But anyway, it's an exciting talk, and I participated a little bit in that where Marcus came unstuck. Also, after Avacon, I didn't get to much of it, but people from France, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, Britain, Sweden, Spain, and of course the US and Canada actually attended that. And there's comes all that. I don't know if those of you who haven't been in virtual worlds, although you can't see it, I've got these flickering radio waves above my head, which imply that I'm speaking. Gosh golly. Well, I'm actually reading a post here where the pictures aren't actually static; they're animated GIFs, and I can see these waves going on, and I'm trying to.
Okay.
I keep thinking the person is talking to me, and they're not.
That's natural.
Yeah, one of those things. It's like watching a video and right-clicking and thinking, why can't I pan around?
Oh, why can't I? I know.
Yeah. So that was followed by a little bit of talking from Joyce Betancourt about Avacon's other kind of stuff, and crumbs. This has gone overboard. Okay. Now, we on our In-World Review show not so long ago, we had Tosha Tyron on our show, and I'd never realised until she was on the show that she was the partner of the late Lumiere Noir. And the second destination during the week was actually, I think, on the I think it might have been on the Craft Grid. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. I was there for a little bit, but I forget how I got there. Anyway, there was basically a celebration for Lumiere, the late Lumiere Noir. It was an annual sort of party, and it was basically just a 90-minute party. Thursday obviously has a few highlights from chats, but if you weren't there, you missed it. So that's all the news that was from there. And I'm just going to flip back to oopsie daisy, wrong magazine-y bitty thingy. Right, that is about it. Yes, all the other posts are replays of this show from last week. Very good. Right, as I said earlier, welcome back, James. We haven't actually got any news on developer news directly for you this week because James has been absent, but we don't have Marcus here either. So nothing on the developer front for this week, but there you go with the news. We will return, of course, same time, same place next week with another roundup of the week's highlights. Until then, look after yourselves and keep watching the feeds. Bye for now.